Welcome into another episode of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast. I'm your host, Ronnie Moore. And as always, my co-host, the man, Kyle Jessie, digital content editor, Bassmaster.com. He's hanging in and holding it down in Birmingham, Alabama. Kyle, you ready to get this season back underway? We kind of had huge amounts of tournaments early in the spring and then a good significant gap. And now it's time to hit the summer solstice, I guess, with a big slew of events down south and up north.
Feels like we've had about a 6-month break at this point, even though it's not even been, but 6 weeks, I think. Considering, like you said, how many events we had basically back to back, week in between, back to back, all piled in there the first part of the season. This is definitely felt like a big break, but I'm really excited to get back going. And once again, here we are with another slugfest.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the only ones that have really not panned out. I mean, those spring events, when you're in Tennessee and it's March or April, or you are in Florida and it's February, it is so hard to have the premier weather that you want. We always talk about Florida events, and some of the guys, like Jason Christie said it when we did our Pattern of the Month episode for May. He mentioned he would love to go to the Harris Chain or a Florida lake in May because the weather's fine. The spawn is not a factor. You just have feeding fish, and that makes it much more consistent and the chance to be a slugfest unless you hit the spawn perfectly. And we missed it at Chickamauga with the weather as well. We missed it at the Harris Chain, and those weights were fine, but they weren't 100-pound or scaring 100 pounds like we thought. But here we go. Like you said, once again, I'm thinking because we've never not done it, so we've never not done it, which means we have always done it. We have always broke 100 pounds at Lake Fork when we've came. Brandon Cobb in 2019, Patrick Walters 2020. I'll also say Garrett Paquette in 2019. And then we had 2021 with Lee Livesey and Patrick Walters. So a couple guys have broken the century mark at Lake Fork, and here we are again. This time, though, a little bit different. The water is about 5 to 5.5 feet low. It had been about 7 to 8 feet low this spring since they've been working on the Lake Fork Dam. That has finished, so they're allowed to let some more water come back in. So with the rains that we've had, it has filled up just a few feet over the last few months and just a couple inches week by week. So should not change dramatically, even though they did have big storms the evening of day one of practice this week.
Yeah, so like you said, Fork is such a familiar place for the Bassmaster Elite Series over the last several years, but this year it's going to be so much different naturally with the time of the year, a little bit later than the May tournament in 2019, obviously later than the tournament last year, and earlier than the tournament in 2020, which was a fall event. So naturally that alone is going to make this such a different event. But then you add in the factor of low water. I'm really not sure what to expect. We were just talking about that. I'm not exactly sure, what's going to happen, but I think that's what makes this so much more fun for me is, last time we went, it was pretty obvious there's going to be a lot of fish spawning. You kind of had an expectation for what was going to happen, but for me, at least, I'm looking forward to kind of not knowing what we're about to see.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing is it is going to be a post-spawn event. Man, I sounded really northerner right there. I'm sorry. A post-spawn event, postspawn, a full-blown post-spawn event. Because listen to this. In Arkansas, at least, we've had very similar, if not the same weather as Texas. I'm only 3 hours away from Lake Fork. And so East Texas has about the same weather Arkansas does. It was 56-degree water temperature on Good Friday when I went fishing. 56 degrees on Good Friday. I went last week with Jonathan Kelly when he was in Little Rock. It was 80-degree water. It has gone up 24 degrees in Arkansas in a matter of 20 days. So a degree a day, it seems, for the water temperature. And so, Lake Fork is the same exact way. Those fish went through spawn, and they went through the spawn, and they're probably sitting here like, this water level has been the same, but it has not been what we're used to. So where do they spawn? How do they spawn? They knocked that out. The shad spawn, any kind of riprap bank that they have at Fork is not in the water. The shad spawn's probably been a little different how it goes down. And now we have a full-blown post-spawn event. It's funny because you mentioned 2019, Brandon Cobb winning that event, and also Garrett Paquette breaking the century mark. Cobb caught him on day one on a big swim bait, and then we saw him mixing in a frog and sightfish and a jerk bait with shad spawn and all kinds of, actually catching that 11-pounder off the bed as well. a lot of different things for his 100 pounds and his win. Then we saw Garrett Paquette only fish shallow to get his 5-fish limit. Then he fished offshore the whole time. We saw Chad Pipkins jumping in there with big bags, cranking deeper. And then we saw Drew Cook and some of those guys, shad spawn and sight fishing. So they had a lot of things going on. And where I'm getting to is that now we're a little bit farther in to May. It has all of a sudden gone from spring for 3 days this year to full-blown July weather-wise. And the low water, that tells me it has to be one off the bank. And I think that we'll see some traditional offshore fishing go down at Lake Fork this year, but I still think 100 pounds is definitely going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think when you look at it from a logical standpoint, all the shoreline cover that those fish would normally be on, it's pretty much non-existent now. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were still some grass here or there that had just grown up, on the bank, like you would have every year, even if the water was up. But yeah, I mean,
it could get crazy next year in some other places.
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
No doubt. But the thing is, for this year, everything is pointing for this to finally be an offshore slugfest, which, like you said, I've had the opportunity to grow up just a few hours from Lake Fork. And when I think of Lake Fork, obviously it's just like any other lake. It's going to go through the cycles of pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn. But, some of the most crazy days you can have out there are truly in the post-spawn, because those giant fish will wad up and, you can get them fired up like you see on the, Tennessee River lakes. And, the offshore fishing there is so good. But to this point, every year it's been just a tad bit off. Obviously, the fall was way too late. Like you said, the 2019 event was still kind of a mixture where, like you were talking about, there were still fish spawning.
Just a taste. We got a little taste.
Right. And then, for this event, outside of the water being down, ultimately, it's definitely looking like it's going to be an offshore beatdown.
Yeah, the only thing that would maybe keep it a shallow water deal if the water was normal is the fact that we did have maybe such a short window for a spawn season until the water temps got much higher than that. And the shad spawn, they either all spawned the same week, they all are feeding on shad spawn the same week, or it's going to be so spread out and you're going to see little flickers here and there. It's not going to be super heavy. So it tells me it's going to be an offshore beatdown. And so I'm excited about that. Like you said, when you think about Lake Fork, I think about winding a big plug over 250 feet of water and just some giant 10-pounder eats it somehow. And I'm like, I could never do that. No, sir. Let me go see that blade of grass up there with that frog real quick. So the fact that wouldn't even be in play, probably people are going to be fishing maybe some clay banks, on the bank, or I think that we could see some guys catch some big bags off the end of the docks. I will say, for the docks that do have water on them, it's just going to be exactly like the creeks that have two or three pieces of standing timber in the center of them. There's probably like 800 pounds suspended on that tree. I'll just say it's not shooting fish in a barrel, but I will say you're shooting at fish in a smaller barrel. It's not going to be completely easy. We're going to see guys stumble and struggle, but that barrel that they live in, which Lake Fork is not big to begin with, has gotten much smaller. And that's why I think it's going to be textbook offshore. I also think we have not seen the forward-facing sonar at Lake Fork in a summertime pattern happen yet. So I guarantee we see some anglers definitely thrive with that. Maybe not a jerk bait, maybe it's a swim bait, maybe it's a spoon. There's some different things that can happen. So we get to get into that. But yes, episode 77, all about Lake Fork, all about fantasy fishing as well. And it's been a little while since we've done this. It's probably been a little breath of fresh air for some fans, but I did have some fans on Facebook that are like, yo, bro, when y'all dropping the podcast about fantasy fishing? And I'm like, hey, we're getting to it this week. Don't speed us up. I know we've had 6 weeks to it, but we've been doing some other stuff. So how are you feeling going into the second half of the season for fantasy fishing, Kyle?
All the factors that we just talked about with this tournament makes me really uneasy about how this is going to play out, because, I think you can stack your roster with traditional offshore guys and feel pretty confident about it. But just the unknown, about what we're going to see with the water being down, it's just going to fish way different. So, you can go off past history. Obviously, that's a solid strategy in most events. But the reality of it is the lake's never been like it is or is going to be for this event. That has me a little uneasy about it. But at the same point, I'm pretty confident with my roster. And then, I think get past this one, as crazy as it sounds, get past this one. And, I feel pretty confident about the rest of the season, even especially Drain the Lake with some of the guys I've got left.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what some of those other lakes kind of give to us, because it could be a lot of different anglers coming into play. Some of these places, it's multiple times that we've been there, like St. Lawrence and now Pickwick for various tours and the elites. They know these bodies of water, so I think a lot of anglers have the ability to mix it up. But then when we get to Oahe and Mississippi River, you got to think about it. Unless you fish the opens for Mississippi River, there are not too many people who fished the Mississippi River and Oahe in 2018. Just a small portion, maybe 25%, a quarter of our field fished in 2018 when we had those two events. So we're going to have some really familiar places like these three events, Fork, Pickwick, and St. Lawrence. And then we're going to have two really unfamiliar places to end the year. A lot of guys have pre-fished there. A lot of guys went pre-fished this week at Lake Fork, not this week, but for this week. They went in the off limits time and just wanted to bump around on some stumps. I guess they were bored in their downtime. So let's get right into it. For a little refresher, sitting at 84.7%. I'm in the dark green, right in the middle of the dark green. I think each of these buckets is 25%. So I'm over that 75%, but I'm not quite 100%. I'm right there, 84.5, 84.75%. And feeling okay about my points right now for regular Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. Then when it comes to Drain the Lake, that's where I'm kind of got to be really strategic going forward, because I'm 672nd in the world. I think you're like 671st or something. And I'm at 96.5%. I'm looking forward to busting in the top 500 there and seeing if we can end the year strong. But I've already picked all my fantasy teams for Drain the Lake this year. I did a different strategy. I said, let's pick them all beforehand. I've had some ups and downs and some different regrets that I've had, but I'm going to stick with that. And we'll explain some changes I have to make, though, for my team there. So how are you doing in Rapala and in Drain the Lake? I think you are right behind me in Drain the Lake now. So I gotta up my game.
You are correct. So Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, I am currently 92.4.
Okay.
I've been pretty consistent around that, mid to low 90s range. The last tournament at Chickamauga, I dropped, I don't know, a percent.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
You were right behind me at Santee. We were neck and neck at Santee,
right.
And then going into Chick. Yeah.
So not bad there. And then Drain the Lake, we talked about it on the last episode where we talked about fantasy fishing, but I loaded up the roster at Chickamauga and I made a huge jump to 96.4% in Drain the Lake. And I'm actually a little bit behind you, like you mentioned, 688.
Oh, yeah. I was right.
But if I was able to track that down, how big of a jump that was, it'd be several thousand people, because I put some heavy hitters on the roster there at Chickamauga.
Yeah, and that's kind of, do you think, okay, so if you're going to put a bunch of big names, star-studded anglers on your team, that's what we mean when we say heavy hitters. Do you think the risk and the reward paid off for you because you had a big jump, but now you do not have them the rest of the year? So I guess when you pick one of those star-studded anglers, you want them to do well, and you got that done, but now you don't have some of those guys the rest of the year. Are you still equipped for a good charge with 5 events left?
I am. So kind of my strategy this year, the way I have viewed Drain the Lake, and it worked out, okay up until this last tournament, and it's worked out really well, is you basically can take this season and you can split it in half. You can talk about your first half being your shallow water power fishing guys, your Greg Hackney's, your Jason Christie's, Drew Cooks, Drew Benton's, obviously with all the sight fishing that we've had. And then you can look at the second half of the season, starting with Fork. Obviously offshore fishing can be different. So offshore fishing for largemouth versus smallmouth, obviously completely different things, but save as many of my smallmouth guys as possible, which has been a very popular strategy for most people. And then save a lot of my, deep water summertime ledge fishing guys for these next 2 tournaments. So far I'm pretty confident that I've still got, the anglers that it takes, but there's definitely some of them that I've used that I definitely would have liked to have for later in the season. But I think it's nearly impossible to not have that a little bit with Drain the Lake.
Yeah, I think that there's always those ones that we could go back, and I'm probably going to write a postmortem, even though I haven't wrote a story all year. At the end of the year, I'm going to be completely transparent on how my strategy went. I stuck to it and see how it resulted out for me. So, and how it compared to past years, because last year during the lake we got half a season and I did really, really well. I was excited about this year. Next year, even though I can't win any prizes, I might make 2 different teams. I might make a wrote down on paper team and then a actual team online. So let's get into our picks for Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, though. And bucket A, if you don't know how these buckets sort out, bucket A is the top 18 to 20 in Angler of the Year. And some of the classic points are distributed in there as well. Like you see, when it comes to Angler of the Year, you'll see a couple guys in the rank category, like Scott Canterbury and Jamie Hartman and Jay Shakirat and Jason Williamson. Those guys all have like lower ranks. Then you're like, why is that? Well, they didn't fish in the Classic, which is not an AOY points event for why they're in this bucket, but because they didn't get fantasy points, that's why their rank is lower. But it's the top 18 or so, 20 or so in Angler of the Year. Who you going with in bucket A? Let's kick it off, Kyle.
Bucket A, a short drive down I-30. I'm going Stetson Blaylock in bucket A. So obviously, don't get me wrong, it's really hard to go against Patrick Walters in bucket A. His success on Lake Fork, really every time we've been there, is pretty astounding. And then also you've got Polnick, who is also in the last 2 events has done extremely well Lake Fork. With that said, I think Stetson Blaylock's definitely got some positive momentum rolling this season, is having a really good season so far. And in the past, I'm not sure, you can maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, but if he still does this, but in the past, Stetson Blaylock actually used to do guided trips on Lake Fork, spend a lot of time down there. Like I mentioned, where Stetson's from is in between where I grew up and where you live now. So it's really not that long of a drive to Lake Fork. He spent, like I said, plenty of hours out there, outside of being a local, as far as proximity to where you live. He's definitely the most local that doesn't live in Texas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, he actually did. And when we say guided trips, it was different. He used to do electronics courses and electronics guiding trips. So he could show you during the summer months and whatnot, what it looked like under the water and what, kind of deciphering all of those variables at Lake Fork. And so I like that pick for bucket A. A guy who has treated me well over the years, and he's honestly just an all around nice guy, hasn't had the best Texas success, but man, I called it earlier in the year, and I think that I'm just going to ride this train. I like Brandon Lester, and I'm going to pick him because, man, I'm trying to get my point across here, but he is a dragger. If there's ever a guy who is maybe in the wrong generation of bass angling, it would maybe be Brandon Lester. We could put him in the 80s. We could put him in the early 90s, and he would be just as successful as he is now, because he is a good old shaky head fisherman. He is a worm dragger. He'll throw him a crankbait and a swim bait. He'll sight fish with the best of them. He'll go down the bank and just flip or swim jig or whatever. And he loves throwing a bladed jig. I mean, Brandon Lester is an all-around old school angler with new school tendencies. And so I think that Lester here, if it comes to maximizing, so that's the biggest thing. He's grown up on the Tennessee River. He knows how those schools of offshore fish. We saw him in Gunnersville one year do that, managing fish on a roadbed. I think managing them, but also catching the crap out of them at the same time, like knowing when to leave and when to stay. At Fork, there are not 92 good offshore spots at Lake Fork. So you're going to have to share some fish. Probably you're going to fish behind people. I think that he's one that's good at managing spots. And hey, I've got 12 fish on this graph on this area. I'm going to catch 5 or 6 today, and I'm going to try to save some for tomorrow or whatever the case may be. So Brandon Lester is going to be my bucket A pick there. What a rock solid angler. I think we did our midseason report card, and I picked him to win Angler of the Year. I think he's right there, 6th, 7th place, 8th place, right around there. And I'd be shocked if Lester didn't produce the rest of the year with the schedule we have. Jumping into bucket B, I'll go first. I'm going to go, because there are some other names in this bucket that you could totally pick. There's some Hackneys and some Hanselmans and some Buddy Grosses, some Seth Fighter, Jason Christie. This is kind of a star-studded deal. Swindle, Zaldane as well. Scott Martin. There are some really big names in this bucket. And that is that 19th to 39th place in points. Basically, if you're not in the top 20 in points, but you're still in the classic cut, that's who this bucket is. And one of the names I didn't mention that I'm going to go with this week is a guy from above the border. And Dave Mercer will love this one. I'm going with Chris Johnston in bucket B. I think that electronics sake, offshore fishing, I think that Chris will do just fine. Fishing the way I will say he likes to fish. He likes to get up there and he likes to smallmouth fish. He likes to flip grass. That's what they do in Canada. That's something that people don't talk about often with Canadians. But I think he's really good at fishing offshore and just triangulating your location in a minefield of trees. I feel like Chris Johnston's going to do all right. So I'm picking Chris Johnston, only 3.4%. That even goes back to Brandon Lester. I'm not taking a risk by picking these guys. These guys are rock solid, and I think that they should do well, and they've got normally decent track records at these places. 1.1% for Lester and only 3.4% for Chris Johnston compared to guys in that bucket that are 20, 10, 37%. I mean, there's just a lot of guys that are taking 8 or more percentage points away. And so 3.4, I feel like that's a steal for Chris Johnston in bucket B.
Yeah, I like that pick. I think Chris Johnston's, both the Johnston brothers are always going to be a solid pick when the fish are offshore, regardless if you're talking largemouth or smallmouth. So that's a good pick. So bucket B for me, I'm going with somebody that you did mention. I got to go with Seth Feider. So obviously after such a stellar 2021 season, a little slower start to the 2022 season, still, north of the, 50, around 50 in Angler of the Year points. I want to say it's 47 in the mid 40s, I believe. But I think this is kind of where you might see the season turn around for Seth. If you look at history on Lake Fork, you're talking about 3 trips and never finished outside of the top 12. For somebody that's only at 9% right now in a bucket, not that that's super low, but 9% for somebody that has 3 tournaments on this body of water and never finished outside the top 12, I'm going to take that all day long. Right off the jump, when I made my original roster, I did have Hackney. And then by the time I started thinking about it, I was like, you really can't, argue the success that Fighters had on Fork. And like I said, I really like for this to be the point that Fighter turns his 2022 season around.
I like that. Seth, it's kind of been a weird year, like you said, for it being so spectacular for him last year. It's kind of just like ho hum, yet still in the classic. And like, we just haven't talked about it as much, but it's because we saw him on camera, like every event, he was just doing so well. So I could live with that Fighter pick for sure. Who's your bucket C though?
So bucket C, I'm going north of the border in bucket C. I waited till C to do that, but
wait. You're going above the border, and I'm assuming you're not talking like on a globe and maybe somehow making Japan or Australia above the United States. So you're going with a Canadian, and if that's the case, I think we're picking the same guy, to be honest. Yep, it looks like we will be. Yeah,
Jeff Gustafson.
Yes.
So we can kind of tag team this one, but
yeah,
for me, it's the same logic that you were talking about with Chris Johnston is kind of why I like Gussie. Knowing that the fish are going to be offshore and he's going to be able to live off the bank makes him a dangerous option, really, regardless where, the fish are at. And then you look back at the 2019 tournament, I'd have to look it up. I want to say he was, had a really good event in that 2019 event when it was in May, fishing Lake Fork, or fishing offshore, excuse me. I don't have the number here, but anyways, of his 3, events, excuse me.
I think it was 2019. I think it was 2019. Yeah.
What did I say?
No. I was just clarifying. Yeah. 2019.
Gotcha, yeah. 2019 when it was May, he was able to fish offshore and do the kind of things that you would think we'd, see him be able to do basically solely this event. And considering the last time I looked, he was under 4%.
Yes.
I have to look. Yeah, 3.9%. I think that's a really solid pick. I think Gussie's going to surprise some people in bucket C.
Yeah, I liked Gussie for this one. I really I almost did that thing. Let's just take it back. When you're doing a Scantron in high school or in college and you're doing a standardized test and you're looking down your answers, even if you know your material and you all of a sudden have A, B, C, A. You're like, one of those is wrong. There's no way all of these things are A. That's the way I feel with my bucket B, C, and D picks, because they're all northern anglers. And I'm like, I don't want to do it, but I'm not superstitious, but I can't pick two Canadians. And so I am doing that for my Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing team. And I think Gussie, I think he learned a lot in 2019. And for the anglers who participated in that event that did it shallow, or missed the boat completely, I think that he was one who maybe didn't expose all of his goodness, whether the fish are even on that stuff or not. He also had like a soft plastic jerk bait with schooling fish deal going on as well, catch them on a spinning rod. And some of that stuff's not even in the water anymore. But for some of these things, I think that he had the right train of thought. I don't know if he's ever fished Lake Fork before the Elite Series time, but he might have been clued in just watching and paying attention to bait selection. It's not just talking about big glide baits or big swim baits, like throwing big crankbaits and throwing some big worms and things like that. But I also think that some of these guys, I think that forward-facing sonar, we'll see how that works out. And I also think how Humminbird 360, I think seeing all those trees in the minefield, seeing those creek channels and the way they turn, that is going to be the best way to triangulate some things. You could chase fish all day on your graph forward-facing sonar-wise, whether it's live scope or mega live or active target, any of those. But the 360, seeing all the structure around you, seeing the trees and different things, we saw it at Rodman Factor. We saw 360, we saw live scope. I think, or an active target, all that. When I say forward-facing sonar, I'm not being vague. I'm just covering all three because they're all different names. Utilizing 360 and that, and for the non-electronics guys, they're going to hate it. And I only have one graph on my boat up front. I'm not a big electronics guy either, but I know the power of them. I think triangulating that in a minefield of trees, which is more of a minefield this year than ever before because it is so much lower. I think that some guys who know how to do that stuff and aren't learning this week will crush it. And so I think that that's why we got to look at a Gussie and Bucket C for sure. There are a lot of younger names in that bucket as well, I think. And then there are some other guys that we kind of remember their success. You think about Brandon Card. He was the leader going into the final day last year at this event, even though it was April, but he was fishing offshore. Clark Winlet's from Texas, and a lot of people have picked him. Despite his struggles back and forth at Lake Fork, Brock Mosley's got 20% in this bucket, based on, I guess, finishing second at Chickamauga, but he's one of those anglers that can get hot in a hurry. And so I wonder if that's factoring in. And then you got some other guys that have even been forgotten about in other buckets that have done well here, but maybe aren't picked high. So I'm cool with Gussie. If you're cool with Gussie, are we doing the Gussie pact here?
Yeah, I think we're going Gussie, and we're just going to move right along.
And I need you to do Bucket D, because I asked the question before we kicked off the podcast, before the viewers tuned in, and was like, Kyle, are you picking so-and-so? And he said, yes, I am. And I was like, I'm torn. So kick it off with Bucket D, and tell me who you're picking and the reason why you're willing to take that non-risk / big risk,
So obviously the risk Ronnie is talking about in Bucket D is Lee Livesey. So obviously Lee Livesey is going to be the biggest favorite in this tournament, regardless what bucket he's in. But given the fact that he's in Bucket D right this second, he's sitting at 67.8%, which is, as far as I know, as high
biggest
as
I've ever seen.
Same here.
Let me check the only other giant percentage had to have been Cliff Prince this year, and he was at,
I think it was in the 40s, if I'm not mistaken. It was not even like that close, which is just insane, if I'm not mistaken.
Obviously the percentages have changed because it's reflecting his Lake Fork percentage, not what it was the week at the St. John's. But yeah, I thought it was, if it was anything, I think it got up to like 56%. Like it was over half of the market share.
Right.
But it was also because it was Bucket A. That's the deal. Cliff Prince, local favorite, St. John's River, Bucket A, over 50%. That's huge. Lee Livesey, local favorite, winner. Bucket D, guys who have struggled this year. I mean, no wonder his percentage is that high, 67%.
Right.
Just go ahead and dub it. Highest percentage ever for an angler.
And the reality of it is, like you said, even if he was in bucket A, he would still be the highest angler in that bucket. And I don't even think it's up for debate. Obviously his success on Lake Fork, the fact that he guides there, I could go on and on. I mean, those types of reasons are almost not even worth mentioning. However, for me, as far as a strategy for fantasy fishing, it's almost like Ronnie mentioned, it's almost too big of a risk to not pick him because on paper, I mean, I'm no different than anybody else. I think that Lee Livesey, theoretically should have another top 10. So when you think about it, you're taking the risk at losing to 67% of the people in that bucket if Lee Livesey does what we expect him to. With that being said, for me,
You're killing me.
It's just too big of a risk, and I went with Lee Livesey in bucket D, and I have no problems with it. And that's coming from a guy that does like to go against the percentages, like more often than not. But I can't do it. That's just a ridiculous ask. But I'm pretty sure Ronnie is going to try to suggest that you can.
You're peer pressuring me into almost picking him right now, and I really want to. And it's not a diss to him that I'm not picking him right now on paper, but I am not contractually obligated to picking who I say in this podcast for Rapala Bassmaster. I have not restricted. I may switch to Lee Livesey, but I was sitting there thinking about like, yeah, well, he hasn't made a top 10 every time. Well, the one time he didn't was his first year on the Elite Series, and I think he just didn't know how to necessarily fish his home lake in an elite event. He has definitely figured that out, finishing high in 2020 in the fall, and in 2021 he's won it. And you didn't mention it, he won Ross Barnett for the last Open that we fished just 2 weeks ago. So he's in the Classic now. He does not have to worry about that. And as long as he fishes the last 2 Central Opens and attends, but I think he'd miss an elite for those right now just to make sure he got in. So he's got no pressure other than going back to back and fishing on his home body of water. And I think and now I keep talking myself into it. The only reason why he did bad in 2019, I feel, is because he was doing I'm fishing offshore. No, I'm not. I'm fishing shallow. Yes, I am. I'm fishing offshore. No, I'm not. I'm fishing shallow. And he keeps going back and forth. And then he got stuck outside the cut by just a spot or two. And he would have been able to improve the next day for sure, because he was finally honing in what he should do. But I just remember how tough his day 2 was there.
I think, like you said, what you have
he's gonna catch him. He's gonna catch him.
No doubt.
I just can't do it. I got burned by Cliff Prince earlier this year. I can't do 67.8% for Lee Livesey. Call me stupid. That's fine. I got him for my Drain the Lake, like we mentioned, because Drain the Lake exists and Rapala do, and they exist, in conjunction to one another. You can pick the favorites without risking and mortgaging your Rapala fantasy fishing team for that. So I do have Lee Livesey, just not in the 5-man, because I decided to pick Austin Felix. He is my 3rd Northerner I've picked for this event. 2.7%. Ain't no way Austin Felix is going to be in bucket D at the end of this event. No way he's going to be down there still. It's really weird to see Hank Cherry, Austin Felix, Lee Livesey, Wes Logan, Mark Menendez, Brian Schmidt. What are these guys doing down in bucket D? So there's a lot of young guys mixed in there with them as well that I could say the same thing for, because I think all these guys are great. But I'm going with Austin Felix. I like his offshore game. I remember when he fished offshore at Santee Cooper when no one else was, and he did it and managed to do well. I think he also has fished in Texas last week some. He came down and fished in Texas. So he got acclimated to what the fish are probably doing down there, even though Fork is different. And I think that Felix, we're going to see, we saw him spawn fishing last year for a top 10. And I think that, I could see a top 20 getting out of him. But I will say, if Felix beats Livesey, even by 1 spot in the top 10 and gets 5 or 6 extra points compared to Lee, that's 5 or 6 extra points that I get to beat 68% of the people who picked him. So no fault. I'm not talking anybody out of picking Lee Livesey. Just, that is a huge percentage. That is the biggest I've ever seen.
The risk goes back and forth, though. It goes on both sides, because if he does do well, obviously you're part of
I'm going to get my brain smashed in for sure. If I was higher, if I was 95 percentile and I was trying to protect my lead, I'm doing it. But I'm at 84. I got to make a little bit of a push. And this might be one of the last times that I don't pick the local favorite, but
I can respect that.
Who just knows? Yeah. Well, you can respect it till I suck. And then you're going to tell me, you're going to bring up this, you're going to screen record this part of it and send it to me.
I think you're going to change it. I think you're honestly, the morning of the tournament, you're going to be driving to JM Studio and you're going to be like, there's no way Lee Livesey's not catching them. Old switcheroo and act like it never happens.
What would happen? Austin Felix would catch the first 5-pounder on Bass Track, and I would text you while you're out there floating and bobbing in the standing timber and be like, you know what, Kyle, screw me and my indecision. That's what I would exactly say. But I don't know. I might stick with it. So give me bucket E, because we may match in this one. I just talked about, I didn't want to pick a high percentage guy that high. 67's high. I've picked guys in the 40s before. And I may just tangle with that with Keith Combs and bucket E. I had to go Keith Combs for one, because what the heck is Keith Combs doing in bucket E? I could say the same thing. I said it last bucket, but look at the career accomplishments of Justin Atkins, Keith Combs, Mike Iaconelli, Steve Kennedy, Paul Mueller, Kyle Welcher. What are we doing? That is bucket E is like, if you put this bucket and said and disguise it as bucket A or maybe bucket B, 100% believable.
No doubt.
Bucket E, not believable at all that's bucket E. So at 43%, I think Steve Kennedy, I think an Iaconelli, I think some of the Kyle Welcher are going to steal some percentage points away. It's not going to make it to 50. I got to pick Keith Combs at 43, and the homeboy just caught him big at Rayburn, his home body of water, doing what he loves to do. And I just can't wait to see that chartreuse and blueback crankbait in his hand. Oh my God. I can't wait to see that in his hand.
So I see, this is where you and I are going to basically flip flop though, because I had the same internal battle in bucket E that you had in D, because knowing that I was going to go with Lee Livesey in bucket D, it was hard for me to go with Combs in E, because that's back-to-back super high percentages. But at the same point, I'm, fairly decent. I'm I guess content with where I'm at percent wise. I would like to move up, but if I stay there, I'd be, fairly happy.
You can still be a pundit next year and we'll invite you back.
Yeah, right. I don't get kicked off the pundit group.
We need to do a cut though. We do, honestly.
but with that being said, and with all being completely transparent, I might do the same thing Ronnie's going to do in bucket D and switch last minute. Keith Combs is the logical pick. That's who I would like to pick.
This is an illogical game mode, though. Remember,
there's still chance I will pick Keith Combs in bucket E. I never do that. I never switch. But this one is one that I really
switching. I'm not switching. You're switching.
No, I don't know about it, but. With that being said, I'm going super low percentage in bucket E. And right now I'm going to go with Justin Atkins in E. Obviously, don't get me wrong. I mean, you can get me started on how many times he's burned me, and he absolutely has. And I would tell him that to his face. With that being said,
I just texted it to
him. With that being said, this does suit his style very well. Obviously, he's a good offshore fisherman, has plenty of experience on the Tennessee River. I mentioned that earlier with some of the other guys. Give Justin Atkins a chance to be offshore, rotate through, a lot of the same baits that you'd have already mentioned, deep diving crankbait, big worm, hair jig, big spoon. Yeah, swim bait. I mean, just the whole rotation of offshore things. I think Justin Atkins is going to be in his comfort zone. Don't get me wrong. I mean, like I said, being very transparent, I might change because the prospect of Keith Combs doing what we expect him to do is so high that once again, it's one of those things, it's hard to go with the risk. With that being said, outside of bucket C, a lot of my picks were, I wouldn't say high percentage, but like medium to high percentage. And bucket E was one of those where I was kind of willing to maybe take a risk, but a little undetermined at this point.
Yeah, it's one of those things in Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. If you take a risk and you hedge your bets with like a low percentage guy, or you're risking with a low percentage guy, one of the two, like if it's like high, low, you're trying to do something a little different. But I've seen it so many times where when you hedge your bet and he does terrible, your chalk team ends up becoming average. You know what I'm saying? Like it brings, whereas if you risk, you have the opportunity, like you're drain the lake and just boom, make some points up. But if you went chalk or you went risk or whatever, low percentage, whatever it is for drain the lake last event and didn't have some of those guys in, you'd probably have an ordinary team, but you got to have an extraordinary team because you did that. So I respect it. I think the one thing that we've said Atkins' name for someone who's been in bucket E basically 2 straight years on the Elite Series, we've talked about his struggles and whatnot and what's riding on the line for him and how he needs to start catching him if he wants to be on the Elite Series in 2023. For Atkins, he did have a good Ross Barnett Open. Totally different fishing, but one good thing about fishing, it only takes a solid good day, one good day on the water to get the ball rolling into another good day. And then now you're excited to fish again. You're not happy to be done with the event. You want to fish day 3 and you barely missed the cut. And then you roll that positive momentum into an elite event. We could see that possibly happen with Atkins. That's the one good thing riding on him. And no pressure here because all the pressure is next event at Pickwick, his home body of water, where he's going to be a higher percentage. And then you're going to want to pick him. But you're trying to get on that gravy train beforehand. I see what you're doing. I like it. I like the team. So let's go back through it. I got Brandon Lester, Chris Johnston, Jeff Gustafson, Austin Felix, and Keith Combs. Those are my 5. The only guy I will mention, the only guy that I thought about in bucket D other than Felix and Livesey is not currently in there, and that's Cody Huff. Cody Huff and Mike Huff got switched in fantasy fishing. One's in bucket B, one's in bucket D. They should be flip-flop back, and if that takes effect, Cody will be back in bucket D. Mike will be back in bucket B. They just obviously have the same last name, so they got mixed up. But I like Cody Huff for this style of fishing as well. He's done well in Toledo Bend, out in the middle of the timber. I would pick him in bucket D over Austin Felix 100%. So that's my one caveat. We talked about who I'm flip-flopping in bucket D. I will not switch to Livesey. I may switch to Cody Huff for that reason. But I will say in bucket B, I can't go with Cody Huff in his performance this season in bucket B until he's earned that. So bucket D, if he gets put in bucket D, I may make that switch. But that's just, if he catches him, just know I told you. So I'll say that one more time. Lester, Johnston with the Chris variety, Gustafson, Felix, and Combs are my 5.
So I've got Stetson Blaylock, Seth Fider, Jeff Gustafson, Lee Livesey, and Justin Atkins. Maybe Keith Combs.
Maybe Keith Combs. Give me your winning weight, because I get all kinds of willy-nilly with the winning weight deal. Don't you tell me you put under 100 pounds, because that's bullcrap if you did.
No, okay. I put over 100 pounds. I put 106 pounds, 11 ounces.
To win?
I still went low. Yeah,
I know you did. I know.
I still went low because ultimately it never fails. You should know, being that you guessed 42 pounds heavy at the Harris chain.
Shut up.
42 pounds heavy.
I guessed 1 ounce off the winning weight at the Classic too.
So all I'm saying is that I'm gonna go a little light. I always do. But 106.11, I'm cashing in there.
You know, I like a little meat on my steak, so I'm going heavy here. What do you think? What do you think my heavy is?
Oh my Lord. I don't know. 130 pounds.
123 pounds, 4 ounces.
I think that what's going to happen,
wrong or right, you know, I mean,
is what you've already kind of mentioned this. There's only so many spots on a lake like Lake Fork where it's not that big of a lake anyways, and then you suck the water out of it.
But they're old bigs. The old big, it's the OBPC. It's an advanced stat. Old bigs per capita. Now that means there's so many more big fish per water surface area. Old bigs per capita. OBPC. Yeah. Old bigs per capita. That's what you drain that water out. I mean, now there's 12 bigs on that spot, you know?
I agree, but I think you're going to have 12 bigs and 3 anglers on the spot. So I think that the potential for that, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't be surprised if it took more than what you're suggesting. So don't take my low guess, for me thinking it's going to be low. it's just a reverse psychology thing. I've done it. I've talked about it every single podcast. I just always go low just so I don't overshoot it, because that's the easy thing to do.
Well, we kind of split the difference there. The winning weight for Cobb was 114. The winning weight for Livesey was 112. Yours is about 8 pounds short of Cobb's. Mine's about 9 pounds high of Cobb. So we kind of split the difference on that 100 and teens somewhere in there. So I wouldn't be surprised if that. Do you think, this is off the topic of fantasy fishing, because this podcast is completely derailed almost, but we're having the most fun we've had in a while. Do you think we see a double on Bassmaster Live? 2 bass on 1 bait?
That's an odd question. I did not expect to get asked that. With a deep diving crankbait, or just, crankbaits in general, coming to play, it definitely seems possible. That's one of those things where it's so unusual that you hate to say it's going to happen, but there's a better chance in this tournament than really any other tournament in the year. Pickwick obviously could potentially happen, but I think that this is your best chance of the year, I would think.
You don't think you're going to catch 2 smallmouth on 1 drop shot hook at St. Lawrence?
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
exactly.
So 2019 fun fact, Keith Combs caught a double on a crankbait, old powder blue plug. I don't know about 2020 in the fall of camera worthy doubles. Maybe Walters did. They might have been small ones. I can't remember. But 2021, Fighter caught a double on a plug as well on a shad spawn. So it was a shallower plug. So we've seen 2 of our 3 events, and I don't even know about the one that we didn't see it on. I need to fully vet that for the highlights, but we could have a double every time we come to Lake Fork. And so that's why I asked that. So that's just my advanced statistics. I already pulled the OBPC out there on you. And so now I'm just pulling the doubled up crankbait bite. So we'll see about that. Let's get into it real quick with Drain the Lake. Kyle, some changes to my team. And that's something we don't talk about with Drain the Lake. So with Drain the Lake, I set my lineup for those who don't know, Drain the Lake. If you don't know, thank you for watching this far into the podcast, for one, because if you don't know fantasy fishing, you're still watching. Thank you. Or if you're just waking up from a nap and you're about an hour into the podcast and you're watching, thank you for tuning in. Good morning. Drain the Lake is an 8-man lineup. So 5-man for Rapala, Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. You can pick any of those guys as many times as you want throughout the year. But for Mercury Drain the Lake, it's an 8-man lineup, and you can only pick that angler one time through the year. Once you pick them, you can't use them again. So the guys I picked at St. John's and Harris Chain and Chickamauga and Santee and the Classic, can't use them anymore. So you have about half of the field left. We have 8 anglers, 5 events this year. We've used 40 of the 92. You got about 50 left for your last 5 events, and you're going to leave about 10 short of your fulfillment. So that's the way that goes. I set my lineups. I looked at the schedule at the beginning of the year and I said, here's my guys for every single event. I did make an amendment in there with Tommy and Such and I, when we compete in this 3-man league, is if that angler gets hurt, doesn't fish, isn't in the event, something happens, you can substitute that angler out. You don't just have to get stuck with a 0. So I'm going to go ahead and start off. My team is set, but I have to make a substitution because we have 2 anglers this week that will not be fishing with the Elite Series the rest of 2022. And Kyle, you can speak to that as well. We know about Jessie Takarani and his family dynamic at home, a lot of illness in his family, and he is kind of the sole caregiver for a lot of them. And so he has gone to be with his family the rest of the year. Ending his stint on the Elite Series, he got a hardship to come back this season and fish, made it through half the year, needs to take care of home. He has already lost 1 parent this year, and he wants to be there for his family in this time. So respect Jessie Tacarante's decision there. It's very hard to pull yourself away from your career and do so. And I know you get to talk to him about that. If you want to mention that, you can. But also, we lost an angler for our roster. He's doing well and fine, but we lost him for the rest of the season for Lake Fork, and that is Brad Watley.
Yeah, so like you said,
Texan Brad Watley, like right. hardest decision of his life to not fish the rest of the season, Brad Watley.
No doubt. So he's dealing with some health issues. He gave me a lot of details. I don't want to give too many.
Yeah, exactly. HIPAA law, bro.
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure what he's wanting to put out there and things of that nature. But he's dealing with some pretty serious health issues, not, life threatening at this moment, but if they're not, taken care of, obviously can become that. So like you said, this is a really tough decision for him based on, the schedule that's remaining. Obviously he's had a tough season to this point, but the way the schedule was setting up is really going to turn around for him. All three of the next tournaments, he's had, top 20 finishes in all three of them in the past. But, like I said, he is understanding that, this is a decision he needs to make to get better, to, get in better health. And something, he mentioned, obviously, I think to both of us was the fact that, this season so far, he's just not been in the right state. He's 2 of the 4 events. He said that he had absolutely no business being there, just from a health standpoint.
Yeah, he's missed over a quarter of the practice days this year just to try to make the tournament. And kind of you getting to the point of, yeah, he's dodged the bullet. So basically what has gone on with Brad is that he has had this illness for years, but it has been, in the background, not a problem. It has now flared up as a, out of remission, I guess you could say. It's not cancer or anything like that. That's the word we use with cancer oftentimes, but it's something that's now bothering him quite a bit. So he has actually also scheduled kind of a consultation of guidance with doctors, and he has had to make that decision. And I had to talk to him on the phone about it. It was like, at a certain point, you have to pick life and wellness over fishing. And it pains you to do that because you're looking forward to Lake Fork so much. Pickwick, St. Lawrence, like you mentioned, he had a great pre-practice at Lake Oahe last year, the time of year we're going to be there. Super stoked about that. Mississippi River would be his style as well. And so he said, I can climb out of this hole that I'm in. I've made some good decisions this year. They just haven't translated to finishes. And so the risk, though, is if you don't, we talked about missing a quarter of practice days. If you miss a tournament day for an event, your season's done. You're going to get 0 points if you miss the whole event. You're going to get last place points if you fish one day of the tournament. Unless you go out and wreck 47 pounds and you move up to the cut line, you're going to get 0 or the minimal points you can get. Your season's done. You're not making the classic. You're not requalified for the elites, any of that. And so at a certain point, we said, Brad, you got to choose life and health or fishing. And if you do, we're almost to the halfway point of the year. You got to pick the medical hardship up soon. And that's what he's been debating about for the last 6 weeks. So he hasn't really had a vacation the last 6 weeks. He's been in and out of doctors asking, figuring it out, trying to figure out what he should do. And finally, it's came to a head just a couple days before Fork.
Yeah, no, it's been a tough decision. You could tell that it really was weighing on him, and it was definitely not a decision that anybody wants to make, but especially like we mentioned with the season, the schedule turning around the way it was. But ultimately, I think this is gonna help him out and get him in good health. And like you said, that's by far what's more important than anything. And he's confident that he's gonna battle back.
Yeah, he's not going to be bedridden the rest of the year. You'll see him out on your local lake, or you'll see him fishing here and there. But when it comes to a 7-day stretch in another state, another city, away from your family and your doctors, trying to fish 3 days for practice, and then trying to prepare yourself to fish 4 days of an event. I mean, that's the last thing we need also is Brad Wiley to be leading an event going in the final day and can't fish the final day because he can't get out of bed or something. So prayers for him, prayers for Jessie Tacarante. So we'll have 92 anglers. And so I'll go ahead and kick it off. I started that whole deal about I had to replace him on my team, and I just did so with you on the call. And I am picking Clint Davis. I'm putting him in the lineup. Clint, you're in. You're playing third base this game. And that's the hot corner, so you better bring it in for my team. But I like for the couple guys I did not have picked, I just revealed to myself, I just gave myself away that I hadn't picked Clint Davis for an event this year. I really didn't know where to put him because he is a Coosa River guy, but we're going to his home state in the summer. Those ledge spots always change. You don't know if you're going to get that, so it's hard to pick him at Pickwick for me. And then he didn't get to fish the Northern Swing last year. So I got the last time he fished it was during COVID year, which was a different time of year as well. So I'm picking Clint Davis for Lake Fork. And he is my 8th man on the roster this week. I also have John Cruz, Scott Canterbury, and Masayuki Matsushita. Those are 4 of my 8 anglers We always go back and forth four anglers apiece. So I've got Masayuki Matsushita, Scott Canterbury, John Cruz, and Clint Davis. So here's my train of thought. Masayuki Matsushita has done so well on the elites, mostly shallow, but all of his great opens finishes in the top 10 have been offshore, hot, deep water events that he's done well on. I think that's why I picked him in Lake Fork. Canterbury and Cruz, I think that they have not necessarily caught them as good as they should have at Lake Fork, but I think that they will bust out of that this week and catch them. I didn't want to put Canterbury at Pickwick, so I put him here at Lake Fork. Last Southern event for them other than Pickwick. And then Cruz, normally my trend, and it might happen if Cruz doesn't catch him this week, I'm sticking to my rule of you got to pick Cruz before April is finished, because a lot of John Cruz's, for one, his 2 elite wins and a lot of his success when he's been in the AOY hunt has been early in the year, the first 4 events of the season. And he's a great cold water angler compared to a lot of other elites. So John Cruz, I'm hoping some good mojo this week from him. He has stayed and been with Hudnall, Loughran, and Zaldane, all who have had top 20 finishes at Fork. And Cruz has been kind of the ringleader of the group in general. So looking for Johnny Cruz to do that. So there's 4 of my 8. Give me 4 of your 8.
So I'm going to go from the bottom up. Not that they're in any specific order, obviously, but my final 4 will kind of be
that's what I did.
More obvious. Yeah, kind of your more obvious guys. But I actually went with Cody Huff, Steve Kennedy, Jamie Hartman, and Masayuki Matsushita.
Okay, so we are the same on Massa.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, exactly what you said. You look back to that Sam Rayburn win, obviously what he was able to do offshore, fishing brush piles, fishing that kind of thing. I think that's going to definitely translate to Lake Fork. I think
you can even look at the June event in Texas at Ray Roberts, where he tried to fish offshore and finished in the bottom 5 because it was not happening. So at least he was giving that a run.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that given that should be the deal, you definitely like his chances. But those are my first 4 heading into Drain the Lake.
One more time.
Cody Huff, Steve Kennedy, Jamie Hartman, and Masayuki Matsushita.
So did you pick Kennedy? Did you have him saved here all year? Because we went to Santee, we went to Chick. He's done well at the St. John's in past years. He hasn't done well at all this year, but you saved him and you didn't pick him for the Classic.
So it wasn't really a strategic thing. If we're being honest, it was just, let's see what we got left. And I like the prospect of him being able to throw a big swim bait at Fork. Obviously, it's one of the very few lakes in the country, Chickamauga being one of the other ones that we just, left from. But Fork is one of the few lakes in the entire country where there's times where throwing a big swim bait is the best thing you can be doing. And I think Steve Kennedy wants to be throwing a big swim bait just about any time he can. So I think that naturally, it was a good fit for my roster for what I had left. I think that's the best way to describe it.
I like that. I can respect that. Okay, well, I'm gonna go with my first 4. For NCAA tournament terms, my first 4 were Lee Livesey, Keith Combs, Stetson Blaylock, and Caleb Summerall. Caleb, because this is about as far south, close to Louisiana, as we're going to get the rest of the year. And I think that this will be a good turnaround for his season. I think also being roommates with Lee Livesey will probably help at some point. Hopefully that pays off, other than just, beer. That's how it pays off. But hopefully in fishing knowledge at Lake Fork, it pays off. Stetson, for the same reasons. I think that he's it's weird. Stetson is really good at so many things. Every time I'm about to bring something up, I think of something else. He's a good cold water angler, good sight fisherman, good mid-depth angler, good dock fisherman. And then he's a good deep fisherman. So honestly, he's a complete package. But I think Stetson here, he does have a lot of time on the water. He has probably seen it in the summers when it's been low. This is different kind of low, not because of drought, but same situation. And then, I'll take Lee Livesey and Keith Combs, against the whole field. You know what I'm saying? Like the odds of those two guys, let's just say, winning. What'd you say?
I said, unless you're in bucket D and you're not.
Yeah, unless you're in bucket D. but yeah, Lee Livesey and Keith Combs. I mean, if you had to pick two anglers, a grouping of two to compete with the rest of the field on Fork, I got to go with those two. And so in Drain the Lake, everybody calm down. I picked Lee Livesey. Don't be tweeting at him saying that I didn't pick him, because he probably doesn't have Twitter, for one, and for two, I did pick him for Drain the Lake. And so that is my lineup: Lee Livesey, Keith Combs, Stetson Blaylock, Caleb Summerall, Masayuki Matsushita, Scott Canterbury, John Cruz, and Clint Davis.
So I went Lee Livesey and Keith Combs as well. I went with Brandon Card. I think that, obviously the prospect of offshore fishing, his success in the past, doing that, obviously last year's event being a major factor in that. And then my final angler in Drain the Lake is actually Daryl Gleason. So you and I have talked about this, but I feel like, he had a really good day one at Lake Fork last year. Wasn't the kind of setup that, he was probably wanting. It was mostly all sight fishing. I actually got to cover him on the water. But the fact that this tournament is going to set up to where he can strictly offshore fish, basically from start to finish. I really like Daryl Gleason in this event. And I think that Drain the Lake is a good place. This is a good place to use Daryl.
I would love to see a little pep in his step for someone who's been so positive and optimistic over his career. You get in those slumps, and hopefully we have an angler or two that come to mind. I'm going to talk to you about that. That's going to be a podcast episode coming soon, is breaking that slump. When every angler's been in a slump, I mean, even the greatest of all time have been in slumps, and they break through those slumps. How to do that, and what kind of what anglers have learned after doing so. So we'll get some of that, but hopefully Daryl and Justin Atkins can break out of their slump this week. That would be great to see, especially because Lake Fork, if you break out of your slump at Lake Fork, you caught some OBPCs for sure.
No doubt. Yeah, we're gonna see some giant fish get caught. There's no question about that. There never is when we go to Lake Fork. And I think that seeing them get caught in quick fashion this time around is definitely more of a possibility, based on the fact that they should be pretty ganged up. And those guys that find the big wads of them should be able to put on a show. And I'm excited to watch it.
So we did this in another episode, but it's been a few weeks. Looking at the Angler of the Year list, I'll say it out loud: John Cox, Brandon Polinick, Clifford Perch, David Mullins, Drew Benton, Drew Cook, Brandon Lester, Matt Airy, Brandon Cobb, and Corey Johnston. That's your top 10. Will John Cox, now that we've had a few weeks to mull it over, will John Cox hold the Angler of the Year lead after Lake Fork? He's holding it by 10 points right now over second, 15 over third, and then it kind of starts to get little bitty gaps, goes down from there. I think it's like 59 points or something to 10th. So first to 10th is 59, but first to third is only 15. Will John Cox hold the Angler of the Year lead after this event? And if not, who does, Kyle Jessie?
I'm going to say no, just purely based on the way this tournament's going to set up. And that's nothing against John Cox. I just think that
God, I want him to catch him shallow in this event so bad.
I really do too.
Wouldn't that be crazy?
I mean, just for the sake of entertainment, I'd like to see that. I hope that shallow fishing is definitely still a part of this. I mean, when you say shallow, I think there'll be guys that catch them shallow,
but you're gonna be way off the bank. Yeah, you're gonna. Those 15-foot bars, or those 12-foot spots that are now 5 to 7 feet. Yeah, exactly.
So I think you'll see that. With that being said, I really would like to see some guys fish the bank somehow for, to see success. If there's somebody that's going to do it, it's definitely going to be John Cox. But I mean, when you look at that list, it's hard to think, based on, the easiest suggestion is to say that whoever's in second is going to take that spot. But I think, given the circumstances with this tournament, Polinick's success on Fork, how well this sets up for his liking. You mentioned the Humminbird 360. I think is absolutely one of the best there is at utilizing that. I'm gonna swap. I'm gonna say Brandon Polinick's gonna lead after this event.
That's interesting. I don't think that Cox will hold the lead either. I think he will fall from first. He'll still be up there for sure. I think Clifford Perch is going to be our Angler of the Year leader, the progressive Angler of the Year for the Elite Series. I think he'll take over that lead going into Pickwick in just a few weeks. So, hey, whether you hold, we talked to Mark Menendez in studio the other day. He broke the 31-year Bassmaster Big Bass record with a 13-pounder. And I said, how long did you hold it? And he said 2 years. And I said, that sucks. Like, you break a 31-year-old record, you hold it for 2 years. But for someone to break the Angler of the Year lead and take it, but only for maybe a week or so, hey, you take it when you can get it. So I think Clifford Perch will be the Angler of the Year leader at the end of Lake Fork on day 4. We'll see how that goes. But one last thing, I didn't bring this up when we're making our picks, but I'm going to pull my phone out because I have it written down. How the locals have fared this season. Okay. I know the weather has been really different and really crazy. But the locals this year for fantasy fishing, the guys who have by far probably had the most percentage because of where they live in proximity to the lake, Cliff Prince, 66th at the St. John's. And then we've kind of have 3 anglers who are all equal distance away from the Harris chain. So I wrote them all down. John Cox got 7th, Bernie Schultz got 22nd, and Jessie Tacarante got 91st. So we kind of had one top 10, one top 25, and then one at the bottom. So discern that how you want. But then we go to the Classic, and Brandon Cobb got 34th. And it was 34th sounds good, but it's only out of 55 anglers. So he only beat, 40% of the field. He was in the 60th percentile or whatever. Not super great. Or he was in the 40th percentile, did not beat 60% of the field. Santee Cooper, Patrick Walters got 22nd. Pretty solid for a local guy there, especially with it not being in his wheelhouse. And then Buddy Gross, 61st at Chickamauga. For one, I'm not saying this to put a curse on Lee Livesey, not at all. But it is kind of interesting to look at that. And do you think, Kyle, that there's something to that the locals have not done well this year when Cliff Prince was a show enough, I'm picking him. And some of the other guys were as well. Cobb was a show enough, got to pick him. Buddy Gross, show enough. And these guys all finished 60th out of 90 anglers or 35th out of, 55 anglers. So what say you about this? This is the first time you've thought about it because I just brought it up. I didn't tell you beforehand we were talking about this.
No, that's a good point. And what's interesting the most, I think, about that, outside of, let's say, the Classic with Cobb, you're talking about, unique circumstances, conditions, things that naturally you would think would give the local guy an advantage. It's something we talk about a lot. The weather and everything set up pretty well for Hartwell, which might have had something to do with the fact that, Cobb didn't do as well there. But, you look at Chickamauga being extreme weather, that was just a nightmare as far as weather goes. And then, even Palatka not being the greatest conditions would have helped Buddy Gross and Cliff Prince, but it was not the case. So for me, I don't really know what you can pin it to, given the fact that, a lot of times when the event sets up as a complete slugfest and it kind of takes the home field advantage out of it, when you can go and pretty much just, sight fishing events, a lot of times are like that. Events where the fishing is just spot on. A lot of times that takes the local advantage out of it. But
back in the day, I think of the phrase Cliff Pace said it, and it was, I love fishing great bodies of water during difficult times or during difficult weather because the quality of fish is there, but it takes away any kind of local or preconceived notion that would have had that effect on it. So that's just something I thought about. Walters, obviously, a lot of these anglers are really, really good, but Walters is going to do well, whether it's his home body of water or not. He's proved that. John Cox, he's going to sight fish, whether there's no fish on the bed or not. He's going to do well somehow, either way. But then when you look at the other guys, Cobb catching the biggest bass of the event, but missing the cut because he had such a bad day one. Cliff Prince really just, I don't know what the deal was at the St. John's. It just bit him there. And then Buddy Gross at Chickamauga, solid day one. Thought he was going to be in a decent position. Didn't get a limit on day 2, I don't think, and missed the cut. So not wishing that on Lee Livesey at all, but I do think if you see Lee Livesey struggle, I don't know what it is other than maybe this is the year of so many different things weather-wise. So who knows? But Kyle, thanks for joining me on the podcast, dude. This was episode 77 of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast, and we talked about Lake Fork and fantasy fishing. You can watch the Lake Fork event go down Thursday through Sunday this week. What are the dates on that? The 19th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd, those 4 days. For the Sims Bassmaster Elite, you can see it on Bassmaster.com all 4 days, but on Saturday and Sunday, you can watch it go down live on Fox Sports 1. And I remember we kicked off Fox Sports 1 last year at Lake Fork, and the final day, I dubbed it the best 18 minutes of live, because that whole first segment of, hey, welcome into bass fishing, it's the final day at Lake Fork, every angler on live caught a giant bass to kick off the day. And we were like, I'm out of breath. And we just did one commercial break. I'm like, we're already set for the day on highlights. So Lake Fork should be a good one. Man, what a special place it is. And we'll have to do a podcast to talk about how good Fork is despite the pressure, and how Texas Parks and Wildlife has helped that place out a lot with the slot. So you'll see a lot of anglers, if you're watching Bassmaster Live, catch fish this week that count to their tally. It is catch, weigh, release, because they have a big slot limit from 16 inches to 24 inches. You got to throw them back. So 14 inches and up all count. 5 fish limit still. If you see a guy catch 24 incher, it's going in the live well and he's showing it off down at the weigh-in site. So Kyle, you'll be there. You were on Brandon Card last year. Even though he didn't win, you got some really cool stories that came from that event. Just seeing and feeling the vibes of 2 guys catching 30 plus pounds on the final day nearby. And so it'll be a good one. And we look forward to hearing the stories that come from this event.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting down there, because last year's event, obviously I grew up fishing Lake Fork a decent bit, so it's a place that I really like and, I've enjoyed going to, but getting to see an event there on the water last year was really special. And like you said, that last day with the crowd that was on the water, watching Lee Livesey, having Patrick Walters right there, having Brandon Card all within sight. I mean, it was a really unique dynamic. Obviously the fact that there's, more big fish, whatever your statistic was, big fish per capita, on Lake Fork.
Oh, big per capita.
Whatever it was. It makes this event every single year, really exciting. And like we mentioned, the fact that we're getting a true post-spawn event on Lake Fork, I think that, I couldn't be any more excited about it. That's for sure.
Well, it should be a good one. And we will see you in the next episode of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast.